Four thoughts on the US surprise strike on Iran. First, the logic of war itself has changed. In World War II, when Germany invaded Poland, that was just the beginning chapter. After that came years of escalation, brutal campaigns, multiple countries dragged in, full mobilization. That's why we call it the World War. It had a clear beginning, gradual escalation, long stalemate phases, strategic, counteroffensive, and eventually total defeat from one side. Back then, war meant destroying the enemy's leading forces, massive casualties, entire economies reconstructed. Nations were economically reset by conflict. Then we moved into the Gulf War era, advanced radar, Tomahawk cruise missiles. 20 years ago, in Desert Storm, stealth fighters became decisive. And today, we're at something even more different. Now, war is no longer about showing the world how advanced your weapons are or how completely you can annihilate the other side's manpower. It's about how quickly and at the lowest possible cost you can surgically remove the key nodes in your opponent's nervous system. Command, intelligence, logistics. And then stop. Unless I believe I can cripple you in a day, I probably won't even start the war. I will negotiate first. I will pre-position intelligence. I will mobilize supplies. I will build leverage. And once I do strike, it's usually a blitz. Fast, contained, decisive. The one-punch knockout. So in the next 10 years, it's hard to say whether the world will look more peaceful or more violent. What I think I will see is a more positioned, calculated, localized conflicts that begin and end quickly. Highly controlled regional rebalancing operations. That may be the new norm of modern war. Second point is about the speed. A month ago, the United States was still focused on Venezuela. Its strategic documents emphasized the Western Hemisphere as core priority. The Middle East and even Ukraine were increasingly framed as theaters where the US would support indirectly through arms sales, through European autonomy, but not necessarily lead from the front. And then within 4 to 6 weeks, carrier groups are deployed. Intelligence is locked in. Strike capability is operational. What does that tell you? We live in a world that looks peaceful on the surface, but militaries are permanently in a semi-ready state. Going from no visible deployment to full precision strike capability now takes only about 4 to 6 weeks. That's what military progress really means. Not just better weapons, but how fast you can move into combat readiness. Right now, the United States military can likely move from poster to high-level decapitation strategy in about a month. And that leads to my third point on Taiwan. On this issue, China is clearly uncomfortable. Energy exposure, strategic partners destabilized. Influence in Venezuela and Cuba disrupted. Middle Eastern relationships, Syria, Houthis, Taliban, Iran, now complicated. But the question people are asking is this. With US carriers concentrated in Middle East, is there a Taiwan window? And here's the real calculation. Can you paralyze Taiwan in one day? Can you neutralize its international positioning and prevent strategic reorganization before global reaction kicks in? If you cannot achieve that level of rapid incapacitation, the cost calculation changes dramatically. Because if the world rallies and sanctions escalate, then within 2-3 weeks, US carriers rotate back into the Pacific, then you're facing a completely different scenario. So the real question is not are the carriers there, it's whether you have the capability to achieve decisive paralysis within 4 to 6 weeks of your own mobilization window, and ideally within 24 hours of the execution. If yes, there's the window. If not, it's very hard to justify. Between major powers, escalation only makes sense if you've calculated most of the second and third moves and you expect a resolution with 1 or 2 decisive steps. Prolonged great power attrition wars are extremely unlikely in today's system. And finally, I want to talk about energy and global economics, especially with US midterm approaching. Look, if Trump launches this kind of operation, the biggest risk isn't military, it's political. The Democrat Party, as the opposition side, doesn't need to argue whether the strike is successful or morally justified. If you act, they will find leverage. If Hormuz is disrupted, for example, the oil prices are likely to move up. It becomes an inflation issue, the cost of living issue, the government competence issue. They will say, hey, you failed to control inflation. Similarly, if there's casualties, even if casualties are inevitable, really, in modern wars, they will say you bypassed Congress, violated constitutional norms, recklessly endangered American lives and property. That political battle is guaranteed. So the real question is not whether the strike succeeds militarily, but how quickly can it wind down. The longer the conflict, the more ammunition you hand the opposition heading into midterms. And this leads to the broader issue. Americans' internal political friction. It's not just every 4 years, actually. It's constant. Every 2 years, major reset pressure. Continuous partisan escalation. The uncomfortable question is this. If foreign adversaries ever tried to align with one political fraction for strategic advantage, would that fraction prioritize national interest or partisan gain? To me, it's not a simple question. For example, in the recent State of the Union, Trump asked whether government officials should prioritize American citizens over illegal immigrants. Democrats didn't stand. Why? Because standing would be seen as validating the opposition's framing. So even if you agree to a certain degree on substance, you avoid giving political credit to the other side. That dynamic is visible. Now, does that mean an opposition party would cooperate with hostile foreign actors? Well, not necessarily, because the United States has intelligence services, legal mechanisms, internal safeguards. Any overt collusion would explode politically. But the cost of democratic friction is real. Persistent partisan warfare reduces policy stability and strategic continuity. That's one of the trade-offs of open democratic system. So it's not really about the strike. It's about how modern wars are executed. It gotta be fast, surgical, decisive. It's about how quickly major powers can move from peace to combat posture. It's about whether Taiwan calculations hinge on decisive perilous capability. It's about how energy shocks translate into election risk. That's the real structure behind the headlines.